Hello, my name is Father Lawrence Jagfeld. I am a Franciscan friar of the Sacred Heart Province, headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. I am also the administrator of CUSA, an apostolate of persons with chronic illness and/or disability. That apostolate is headquartered in Cicero, Illinois. For the next few Sundays, we will be celebrating feast days that relate to the Christmas season. This particular Sunday is the Feast of the Holy Family. The Gospel for this Sunday relates the event that we call the finding of the child Jesus in the Temple of Jerusalem. It may be difficult for us to understand how this event played out, but that difficulty is part of our, you might say, romanticizing the whole issue of the Holy Family. We tend to think of them as Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. However, families at this time in history and in this culture would have been far more extensive. Jesus, as a child, would have been raised by all of the women of the household. His mother, his aunts, and his sisters or cousins, until he reached the age of puberty, when he would have been moved from the section of the house reserved for the women to the section of the house that was reserved for the men, where Joseph would have lived with his brothers, perhaps even his father, and Jesus would have been introduced to the male culture of this time and this place. We read in the Gospel that each year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to festival custom. After they had completed its days, as they were returning, the boy Jesus remained behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Thinking that he was in the caravan, they journeyed for a day and looked for him among their relatives and acquaintances. But not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" They did not understand what he said to them. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, in particular, parents would have a hard time understanding how Mary and Joseph could have lost Jesus. But again, we have to remember that these households, these families, were different than our own. Jesus is on the brink of adolescence. He's 12 years old. He's somewhere in between living with the women and being introduced to the culture of men. He is perhaps vacillating between the two of them. When Mary and Joseph begin their return trip to Nazareth in a caravan with the rest of the members of their families, they obviously concluded that Jesus was either with the women, Joseph would have thought that, or with the men, Mary would have thought that. It wasn't until the end of the day, when they gathered around the campfire or gathered around their common meal, that they recognized that Jesus was not in their company. Returning to Jerusalem, they find him after 3 days. They find him in the temple. And they ask him, "Why have you done this to us?" The answer to the question is really rather obvious. If we'd been paying attention to the first 2 chapters of Luke's Gospel, we recognize that both Mary and Joseph are people who have devoted themselves to the will of God in their lives, and they have taught their son well. Mary has probably sung her song for her son and taught him about how God took care of those who are the least in this world. Joseph, a just man, as the scriptures describe him, probably tried to inculcate in Jesus the very traits that he lived by. So when they ask him why they have done this to them, he answers, "Didn't you know that I would be about my Father's business?" Which is just another way of saying, "Didn't you know that I would be doing the things you taught me to do? Didn't you know that I would be about my Father's business?" Just as they have been about their Father's business these past 12 years. This story brings to a conclusion the section of the Gospel that we call the infancy narrative. It is 2 chapters that precede the rest of the Gospel of Luke and tell us about the Annunciation, the Nativity, the purification, the presentation, the circumcision of Jesus. The story ends where it began. The story began in the temple when the angel announced to Zechariah that he would have a son. And now it ends in the temple with Jesus teaching the elders of Israel. This very compact story, this narrative, introduces us to Jesus, who is a child of his culture, a child of this religion, a child of this region, this geographical area. He is a truly human child who is being brought up by very devout Jewish parents. It's obvious that he would be in the temple, for this is what he would have been taught as a child. For more information about CUSA, please visit our website at www.qson.org.